They say the quietest people often carry the loudest wisdom. My grandfather was one of them. He didn't waste words. He didn't need to. His presence was louder than most people's shouting. When he entered a room, no one rushed to speak. We waited. Because when he finally did say something, it wasn't just words. It was meaning. It was guidance. And it still echoes in me all these years later. He wasn't the type to give long advice. He never sat me down and lectured. Instead, he lived the kind of life that made you want to listen. You watched how he treated people, always with respect, even if they didn't deserve it. You saw how he worked. With quiet patience, hands steady and worn. And even when things were tough, he never complained. Not once. That alone taught me more than 100 books ever could. Grandpa had a routine, and he stuck to it. Every morning, he'd rise before dawn, black coffee, a slow walk through the garden, checking the fence, reading the newspaper in silence. No rush, no scrolling, no alerts, no noise, just stillness and purpose. Looking back, I realize he was teaching me something even then. That peace doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing things that matter, quietly, consistently, and with care. I remember a day I came home from school, angry at the world. I had failed a test I thought I'd ace. I threw my bag on the floor and stormed out into the backyard. He was there, sitting on a bench he built himself years ago. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just tapped the seat beside him. I sat. We were silent for a long while. Then he said, "Failing doesn't make you weak. Quitting does." That was it. Nothing more. But that one sentence still carries me through life. He wasn't big on hugs or I love yous. But when my bike broke, he fixed it before I even woke up. When I caught a fever, he left warm towels by my bed. He sat on the porch every time I came home late. Not to scold me, but just to know I made it home safe. His love was silent but strong, and it wrapped around me in ways words never could. When he passed, the house didn't just lose a person, it lost an anchor. But oddly, I still feel him. In how I wake up early now, in how I take care of the things I own, in how I try to listen before I speak. He's in the rhythm of my life. He's in the quiet moments. And every time I pause and ask myself, what would Grandpa do? I somehow hear the answer, not out loud, but deep inside. He didn't leave behind big speeches or handwritten letters of advice. He left something far more powerful, a life well lived, a quiet legacy of strength, patience, and purpose. And if you're lucky enough to have known someone like that, hold on to them. Even when they're gone, their wisdom doesn't fade. It echoes in everything we do, in who we choose to be. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise. He didn't crack jokes at the dinner table. He didn't raise his voice when things went wrong. He didn't pull us into bear hugs or shout our names with joy when we visited. Instead, he simply was there. Not as a spectacle, not as a performer, but as a presence. A quiet, unwavering presence. And somehow, that meant everything. Each morning, long before the rest of us stirred, he was already awake. You could hear the soft creak of the old floorboards under his boots, the gentle clink of the spoon against his chipped ceramic mug, and the turning of pages from a newspaper older than me. He had a rhythm, a discipline that didn't need to be announced. Coffee, always black, no sugar, a slice of toast, sometimes with butter, sometimes plain. The radio turned low, playing news or farm reports, barely audible. He didn't demand attention. He didn't ask for company. But you always knew where to find him. At the same spot at the kitchen table, bathed in the soft light from the window, as the day broke quietly around him. As a child, I didn't understand this kind of quiet. Back then, noise felt like importance. Kids laughing, toys buzzing, cartoons blaring from the TV. My world was full of color and clatter, movement and mess. And in that whirlwind, Grandpa seemed like a ghost, still, muted, distant. But over time, I started to notice things. How he folded his newspaper with precision, aligning every edge. How he never left the table without wiping off the crumbs. How he always rinsed his mug, even if no one asked. It wasn't that he was quiet, because he had nothing to say. He was quiet because he respected the space around him. He didn't take more than he needed, of food, of time, of attention. He simply moved through life with intention. One winter morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The power had gone out from a storm the night before, and the house was cold. I wrapped myself in a blanket and padded down the hall toward the kitchen, drawn by the faint flicker of candlelight. There he was, already seated at the table. No radio, no heat. Just a candle, his cup of coffee, and the paper that he was now reading by flame. He looked up and gave me a small nod. No words, just a nod. I sat across from him, watching as he turned each page with care, as if nothing in the world had changed. And that was when I started to understand. His silence wasn't empty. It was full of calm, full of patience, full of acceptance in and day. A world that hurried and shouted. He was proof that steadiness had a kind of strength all its own. He didn't teach me with lessons on chalkboards or long-winded lectures. He taught me through routine. Through rising early, even when no one asked him to. Through maintaining his tools, even when they still worked just fine. Through never missing Sunday dinner, even when his knees ached from work. He taught me that showing up matters. That doing small things well adds up to a good life. That being present, truly present, is often the most powerful thing you can offer. As I grew older, I started to sit with him in those mornings more often. Not to talk, but just to share the silence. And something amazing happened in those moments. The silence became comfortable. It became ours. He would occasionally offer a short thought, something like, "Frost'll kill the beans if we don't pull 'em today," or "Sky's got that blue that means a cold front's coming." They weren't lessons in the traditional sense, but if you listened with your heart, you'd realize he was teaching still. He was teaching me to observe, to notice the world, to read nature, to listen before speaking, to act with awareness, rather than impulse. I used to wonder why he never gave advice like my teachers or my parents. But now I realize he was too busy being the example. His entire life was the lesson, and I was learning, even when I didn't know it. Now that he's gone, I find myself waking up a little earlier, making my coffee a little stronger, sitting in silence a little longer. Not because I'm trying to be him, but because his rhythm became part of mine. When the world feels too loud, when I feel pulled in 1,000 directions, I remember that morning at the candlelit table. I remember the quiet that held no tension. I remember the man who never had to raise his voice to leave a legacy. There's power in that kind of quiet, a presence that doesn't need applause. A man who didn't say much, but whose wisdom still speaks to me, clear as a bell in the stillness of early morning light. My grandfather's hands told stories he never needed to say out loud. They were thick and weathered, the skin calloused from decades of work. The kind of hands that didn't need gloves, because they were the gloves. Brown from the sun, scarred from accidents he never mentioned, his fingers were wide and strong, curved slightly inward from years of gripping tools. They were not soft. They were not delicate. But when he held something fragile, a light bulb, a baby bird, a child's hand, you'd see something beautiful. A gentleness that could only come from a man who knew what it meant to build and to protect. He never bragged about what he could make, but if something was broken, he'd fix it, quietly, completely, and with a kind of calm you couldn't fake. When a fence post rotted, he didn't curse. He'd just walk out to the shed, pull out a post, and get to work. No drama. No delay. I'd watch him kneel in the dirt, his hands moving like they already knew what needed to happen. The hammer rose and fell with a rhythm that made no sound feel wasted. And when it was done, the fence stood strong again. No applause, no comment, just the nod of a man satisfied with honest labor. He built a rocking chair when my grandmother got sick. Said she'd rest better in it. He didn't measure much. Just eyed the boards and made a few pencil marks. Took him less than 2 days. It wasn't fancy, no carvings or shine, but it was strong, steady, and perfectly balanced. She rocked in that chair every evening after dinner until the day she passed. And even now, it sits by the window, holding memory more than weight. That's what he did. He built things that lasted. When I was about 10, I asked him to help me make a treehouse. I expected him to draw plans, maybe measure every board. But he just walked into the backyard, looked at the old maple tree, and said, "That one'll hold." The next day we started. He didn't say much, just handed me the nails and showed me how to angle the hammer. When I missed, he didn't scold me. He just picked up another nail and let me try again. Over and over, until my hits began to land with the same rhythm as his. I learned more in those 3 weekends than I ever did in school shop class. How to read the grain of the wood. How to listen to the sound a board makes when it's ready to split. How to trust your hands and your patience more than your eyes. He didn't say, "You're doing a good job." He didn't need to. The way he let me hold the saw. The way he stepped aside and let me drive the final nail. That was his praise. And when it was done, we climbed up together and just sat. No celebration, no ceremony, just 2 builders enjoying what they made. He never spoke about hard work like it was a virtue. He simply worked hard. And by watching him, I learned what it meant to give yourself fully to a task. His hands weren't just tools, they were teachers. They taught me how to be deliberate, how to slow down and do it right, how to keep going even when you're tired and no one's watching. They showed me that you don't have to make a lot of noise to make something that lasts. Later, when I got older, I started to realize the deeper lessons in his silence. When my father lost his job, Grandpa came by one morning with 2 full bags of groceries. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Let me help." He just dropped them off and said, "You've got eggs, you've got rice, you're..." All right. Then he left. Those were his hands again, providing, protecting, preparing, without asking for thanks. One winter, he slipped on the ice and broke a finger. I remember thinking, that's it, he'll have to slow down now. But he wrapped it himself tightly, neatly, and kept going. Built 2 new gates that month. He treated pain like he treated nails. Something to work around, not something to stop for. And though I know now that's not always the healthiest way, it taught me resilience. It taught me that strength isn't about muscles or volume. It's about what you keep showing up for, day after day. After he passed, I asked to keep his toolbox. Not because I planned to use all of it, but because inside it were the echoes of his lessons. A square with a bent corner, a hammer with a smooth handle from years of grip, screws sorted in old tobacco tins, pencils cut down to stubs, still sharp. At the end, every item spoke of him, of things made, things fixed, things done right. And sometimes when I'm working on something, a shelf, a leaky faucet, a squeaky hinge, I'll open that toolbox, hold one of his tools, and somehow it feels like he's guiding my hands. Because in the end, that's what he gave me. Not lectures, not manuals, but memory in motion. Habits that echo in my own hands now. Lessons passed not by words, but by work. His hands didn't just build things, they built me. There was one day, just one, when my grandfather really spoke to me. Not in passing, not in fragments or soft grunts, not in the way he usually did, with a nod or the offer of a sandwich instead of a sentence, but with words. Real, chosen, quiet words. And though they were few, they've echoed in my heart ever since. It was the summer I turned 17. I had grown restless in my skin, as most boys do at that age. Restless with rules. Restless with chores. Restless with life in a small town that felt too quiet, too slow, too suffocating. I'd gotten into an argument with my dad that morning. Something about responsibility, about helping out more around the house. I don't remember the details anymore. Only the heat of the words, the slam of the door, and the sting of pride as I stormed out barefoot into the backyard. I made my way to the shed where Grandpa often spent his afternoons, sharpening blades, fixing broken hinges, mending the old things we forgot we needed. He was there, of course. Sitting on a stool by the open door, sharpening his pocket knife on a whetstone. His back was hunched, his eyes focused, and his silence as steady as always. I sat down across from him on an overturned crate, hoping he wouldn't say anything. Hoping he wouldn't ask what was wrong, because I didn't have the words to explain it anyway. We sat like that for a while. The sound of stone against steel, the chirp of cicadas in the trees. My heart still heavy and angry, yet grateful for the silence. Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "You're too full." I blinked. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even directed at me in the way most people talk. It was a simple statement. And yet, it felt like he was holding a mirror to my soul. He looked up briefly and added, "Full of noise, full of wanting, full of trying to be something bigger than yourself. That's heavy." I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at him. Not confused, just surprised. He never spoke like this. Not to me. Not to anyone, really. But something about that moment, maybe the heat of the day or the hurt still lodged in my chest, opened a door inside me. He set the knife down and leaned back. "You ever try to fill a bucket that's already full?" he asked. I shook my head. "It spills over," he said, tapping his temple with a single finger. "Same with the heart. You fill it with anger, with pride, with the need to prove something. There's no room left for peace, no room for wisdom." He paused, then picked up the blade again, this time with gentler hands. "When I was your age, I thought I had to fight everything. Fought my father, fought the land, fought the clock, thought every silence meant weakness, thought being loud made me strong." He ran the knife along the stone with slow, smooth strokes. "But life don't care how loud you are," he continued. "It'll quiet you down soon enough, and when it does, you'll have to face yourself in the silence." That hit me somewhere deep, because I was trying to be loud, to prove I was growing, that I mattered. But all I had really done was fill myself with noise and loneliness. He looked over at me again and said, "I learned eventually that silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of answers that don't shout. Full of truth that don't need to be argued." He leaned forward, handing me the knife, sharp and gleaming. "Sharpen your thoughts like a blade, quietly, patiently. Then when you speak, your words will have weight." We didn't speak much more that afternoon. I helped him clean up the tools, watched how he folded his rag just so. And when I stood to leave, he put his hand on my shoulder. Not hard, just enough. Enough to say, "I see you. I know you're growing. I'm here." That one conversation became an anchor for me. Years later, when I stood at his bedside as he took his final breaths, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, calm and steady, and in that gaze I heard all the words he never spoke. "You're ready now. You know what matters. Keep your heart quiet and your hands busy. Speak less. Do more. Be the man you were meant to be." He didn't need to say goodbye. Because in that one afternoon long ago, he had already given me everything. I've spoken to many people in my life. I've read books, listened to lectures, followed mentors, but nothing ever stayed with me like that day in the shed. Not because of what he said, but because of when he said it and why. He waited until I was ready, until my heart had cracked open just enough to hear. And then, with just a few words, he poured in a lifetime of wisdom. That's what true teachers do. They don't force lessons into you. They wait until you're thirsty, then offer a quiet cup of truth. And now, when I feel my anger rising or my pride clouding my judgment, I remember his words. You're too full, and I let go. Make room for peace. Make room for growth. Because that one day, the day he truly spoke to me, was the day I learned the power of silence and the kind of wisdom that never fades. My grandfather never said the words, I love you. Not once. Not in all the years I knew him. To some that might seem sad, but to me, it means something far more powerful, because he showed his love in 1,000 quiet ways, in gestures you had to learn to read, in silences that held more care than most conversations ever could. His love didn't come wrapped in hugs or warm, sentimental words. It came in early mornings and packed lunches, in sharpened pencils laid neatly by my school books, in picking the ripest apple from the tree and handing it to me without a word. It came in the way he waited in the truck with the engine running when I had to be somewhere, not tapping the wheel, not honking, just waiting, as if to say, I've got time, and I'm giving it to you. When I was sick, he'd never hover. He wouldn't ask how I felt over and over. But I'd find a thermos of hot soup by my door and fresh firewood stacked a little higher near the stove. That was his way. Always watching, always doing, never needing to be noticed. One winter afternoon, the wind knocked out the power during a heavy storm. I was about 11. The lights cut out, and for a moment, I felt that flicker of fear. Within minutes, Grandpa had the lanterns lit, and he'd started a fire that filled the house with warmth and dancing shadows. But what I remember most wasn't the fire. It was the way he handed me a blanket, still warm from the dryer he had turned on just before the power went out. He'd anticipated the outage, prepared for it. And in that moment, I realized he loved us by thinking ahead, by protecting us from discomfort we didn't even see coming. There was a quiet poetry in everything he did. He wouldn't compliment you outright, but if he fixed your bike without you asking, or taught you how to oil the chain just right, that was his I'm proud of you. If he made you a sandwich and handed it over with a fresh apple, that was his I care about you. If he showed you how to use a tool, slowly, patiently, that was his you matter to me. I remember one summer evening when I had a crush on a girl from school. I'd tried to impress her, but things hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. Heart bruised, I came home and sat on the porch, staring at the ground. Grandpa came out and sat beside me. Didn't ask what happened, didn't press, just handed me a root beer. Cold from the old cooler in the garage. We sat there together, listening to the crickets. After a long silence, he said, "Some people see what's real slower than others. Don't change to speed them up." That was it, his version of relationship advice. And somehow it was more helpful than any talk I'd ever had. His way of loving was subtle, but sturdy. He believed in being useful. If he couldn't fix it, he'd find someone who could. If he couldn't say the words, he'd show the care another way, and he never gave out love for show. No grand gestures, no public praise. Just quiet, steady presence. He loved like a tree loves. Deep roots, constant shade, and strong limbs that hold you up without ever asking to be noticed. When my grandmother passed, I watched him closely. He didn't cry, not in front of anyone. But for the next 3 weeks, he placed her slippers at the end of the bed every night, folded her favorite blanket and laid it over her pillow. Not because he thought she was coming back, but because love, for him, didn't end when someone was gone. It continued in the habits, in the rituals, in the respect for memory. That was his quiet devotion. A kind of loyalty that didn't need an audience. He also loved through time. He taught me to fish. Not because I asked, but because he noticed I liked the quiet and the water. He handed me the rod and said, "Don't force it. Just wait. Fish'll come when they're ready." I didn't realize until years later that he was teaching me about more than just fishing. He was teaching me patience, presence, trusting the unseen, and now that he's gone, I feel his love more than ever. In the way I fold my laundry, in how I double-check locks at night, in the habit of sharpening my own pocket knife on a whetstone, just like he did. His love echoes through the smallest things. The smooth handle of an old hammer, the smell of pine shavings in the garage, the way I pause before speaking, to be sure my words are necessary. I remember someone at his funeral said he wasn't very expressive, was he? And I wanted to laugh. Because if they only knew how loudly he loved, in his own language. A language made of quiet footsteps, fixed fences, warm soup, weathered hands and eyes that noticed more than they ever let on. He didn't say, "I love you," but he showed it, in ways you had to grow up to understand. And now, as a grown man, I do. I see that love in all the ways he gave without asking anything in return. In the way he stayed, helped, prepared, and provided. And I realize, now, he was loving us all along, just not the way most people do. His love didn't need to be spoken. It was felt. And it still felt even now. The house felt colder after he passed. Not because the heat was off, not because the seasons had changed, but because something essential was missing. Like the fire had gone out, even though the flames still danced in the hearth. And it was quieter too. Not because he used to speak much, he didn't. But because his silence had weight. His silence had presence. And once it was gone, the air just felt empty. For weeks, I kept expecting to hear his boots on the porch, the slow shuffle of leather soles, the jingle of his keyring, the soft grunt he always gave when he settled into his old chair. But those sounds never came again, and still, somehow, he wasn't completely gone. I started noticing things. The tools in the garage were still right where he left them, lined up with precision, each handle worn smooth from use. His work gloves, folded and resting on the shelf, still held the shape of his hands. His scent, wood smoke, oil, and pine, lingered faintly on the flannel jacket behind the door. It was like the house remembered him, and it kept whispering little pieces of who he was. But the strangest thing was this: I kept hearing him. Not with my ears, but somewhere deeper, in my thoughts, in my instincts, in the quiet parts of my mind, where his wisdom had taken root. When I reached for the wrong wrench, I'd remember how he once corrected me, not with words, but with a quiet shake of the head and the right tool held out. When I got frustrated fixing a cabinet door, I could almost feel him behind me, calm and steady, as if to say, "Slow down. Let the wood tell you what it needs." His advice echoed in the strangest places. When I stood on the edge of a hard decision, his voice came not as a command, but as a kind of internal compass. Do the work. Do it right. Don't cut corners. Don't make excuses. When I caught myself talking too much, trying to fill a silence, I remembered how he could say more by raising an eyebrow than some men say in 100 sentences. So I stopped, and I listened. He never raised his voice, never needed to. But now that he's gone, his quiet strength rings louder than ever. After the funeral, I stayed behind when everyone else left the house. I walked out to the shed, opened it, slowly. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight that streamed through the cracks. There was his workbench, still neat, still his. I sat down in his chair, the one with the cracked leather and the faded cushion. And for the first time I cried. Not because he was gone, but because I finally understood just how much he had given me, without ever saying much at all. I remembered all the moments that didn't seem important back then. The mornings he'd wordlessly hand me a thermos as I left for school. The way he always noticed when something needed fixing, and fixed it before it broke. How he always showed up, always stayed late, always did the job completely. I remembered the way he looked at people, calm, observant, respectful. He didn't judge quickly, didn't gossip, didn't interrupt. He let the world speak, and when he spoke, the world listened. After he was gone, I started doing things differently. I checked the oil in my truck more often, kept my tools clean and sharp, sat with people longer without pulling out my phone. I started noticing things he would have noticed. A loose fence post, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the way a child looked up at their father. I slowed down. I paid attention. And somehow, I felt closer to him in those moments than I ever did when he was sitting beside me. His wisdom became a part of me. Not a voice in my ear, but a rhythm in how I move through life. When someone needs help, I just show up. No big speeches, no need for thanks. Just presence. When something breaks, I fix it with care, because he taught me that how you fix things says a lot about how you live. When I sit with someone who's hurting, I remember, he never filled the silence with cliches. He just stayed. And so I stay too. I visited his grave a few months after he passed. The wind was strong that day. The trees behind the cemetery whispered like they were speaking just to me. I brought him a pocket knife, the one he gave me when I was 10. The one I'd kept sharp all these years. I placed it on the stone, not as a goodbye, but as a thank you for all the lessons, for all the patience, for loving in a way that didn't demand to be noticed, but left a legacy that can't be ignored. Even now, years later, when I hold my own child's hand or repair something around the house, or choose to say less and listen more, I feel him. In the quiet, in the steady, in the things that last. Some people make their mark with noise, with speeches, with fame. But my grandfather, he made his mark in silence, in decency, in the quiet, durable kind of love that outlives a man's heartbeat. And I carry that with me every day. Because though he's gone, his wisdom echoes still. I never set out to become like him. In my younger years, I chased the noise, the fast track, the crowded rooms, the need to be heard. I thought that wisdom was something passed down in lectures, something spoken from a podium, something grand. But my grandfather never needed an audience. He taught me the quiet way. And only now do I realize I've become more like him than I ever imagined. These days, I catch myself doing the little things he used to do, almost without thinking, like waking up before the sun, not because I have to, but because something in those early hours feels holy. The hush of the morning, the golden light creeping in through half-closed curtains, the way the world holds its breath right before the noise begins. I used to wonder why he loved those hours so much, why he'd sit by the window with his coffee, watching the trees sway like they were telling him secrets. He never said a word, just sat there, present, fully alive in that silence. Back then I didn't get it. I thought he was just a man of routine, but now I know. He wasn't waiting for the day to start. That was the start. And somehow, those hours became mine too, as if he handed them down to me, quietly, without a ceremony, just like he did with everything else that mattered. I fix things now, not just because they're broken, but because I understand, finally, what it meant to him to mend rather than replace. He believed that if something served you well, it deserved your effort in return. Whether it was a tool, a table, or a relationship, you kept it going. You didn't throw it out because it was tired. My hands moved like his sometimes, slow, precise, respectful of the task at hand. I remember watching him sharpen his old knives, not in a rush, not for show. Just a rhythm, long, even strokes, the soft sound of steel meeting stone. At the time, I didn't understand why he took so much care. Now I do. It wasn't just about the blade. It was about honoring the process. He never sat me down and said, "Here's how to be a man." But he showed me anyway, every time he opened a door for someone without thinking, every time he let others speak and truly listened, every time he quietly stepped into the background, making sure everyone else had what they needed first. He didn't teach with words. He taught with presence. I've found that his wisdom sneaks into my life when I least expect it. When I'm tempted to cut corners, his patience echoes in the back of my mind. When I'm ready to argue, I remember how he'd pause, just a moment, before saying anything at all, and sometimes I say nothing. Because silence, I've learned, can be a deeper kind of respect. People often ask me where I learned to be so calm, to be steady, to be dependable. I smile. Because I know the answer, but it's not easy to explain. You can't point to a single moment. You can't quote him. He didn't say much. But you feel it, like fingerprints on glass, like footprints on a well-worn path. He's in every part of the man I've become. Even in parenting, he's with me. When my son throws a tantrum, I remember how my grandfather never raised his voice. He let storms pass. He let people feel what they needed to feel, then helped them find their center again. So I kneel down, speak softly, and hold space for emotions to settle. Not because it's easier, but because it's what he would have done. His way of loving was quiet, but consistent, and that love still echoes in how I care for my family, in how I prepare a meal from scratch, in how I sit beside someone without needing to fill the silence. Some men leave behind buildings, books, or business empires. My grandfather left behind a way of being, and I carry that forward, not because I was told to, but because something in me knows it's right. I used to think legacy was something loud, something you had to carve into stone to be remembered. But now I understand. The most enduring legacies are whispered into the lives of others, like a candle lit from another, like a song you hum because you heard it as a child. I often wonder what he'd think if he saw me now. Would he nod in quiet approval? Would he smile that barely there smile of his? I think he'd be proud, not of what I've achieved, but of how I've chosen to live, with care, with intention, with the kind of quiet strength he always carried. Some days I feel the urge to speak more, to explain, to teach, to guide. But then I remember, he never lectured. He just lived well and let me watch. And somehow that did more for me than 1,000 speeches ever could. I see it now. His influence was never loud, but it lingers. In how I treat people, in how I approach work, in how I honor the small moments that most people overlook. The world today is full of noise, everyone rushing to be heard, to go viral, to shout over one another. But I carry something different, something deeper, a legacy built in stillness, a life carved in quiet, and that to me is more powerful than anything spoken. He didn't say much, but he said everything that mattered, and now I live my life in a way that keeps his voice alive. Not in words, but in action, in rhythm, in love. His wisdom still walks beside me, softly, steadily, and it always will. Maybe you had someone like that too, someone who didn't speak much, who never needed a spotlight, but somehow shaped your life more than anyone else. A grandfather, a grandmother, an old neighbor, an aunt who hummed lullabies instead of telling bedtime stories, a father who fixed things in silence, a mother who loved with her actions, someone whose presence stayed with you long after they were gone. If you did, then you understand what I'm trying to say. Not all wisdom is loud. Not all love is spoken. Some of the greatest lessons in life arrive softly, like a breeze through an open window. You don't always notice them at first, but you feel the change they bring. We live in a time where everything is shared instantly, where people talk to be heard, post to be seen, speak just to fill the silence. But there's something rare, something sacred, about those who never needed noise to make a difference. They led by example. They built trust not with speeches, but with reliability. They taught us patience, not by commanding it, but by practicing it. Over and over again. Maybe like me, you didn't recognize it when you were younger. You might have even thought they were too quiet, too reserved, maybe even distant. But now, with time, you've realized they weren't distant at all. They were simply grounded, rooted, fully present in a way that didn't demand attention, yet left a lasting impression. So I ask you this: who in your life gave you wisdom without ever calling it that? Who showed you love not through words, but through presence? And most importantly, have you told their story? Because stories like theirs deserve to be remembered. They may not have written books. They may not have stood behind podiums or given long-winded advice, but their quiet dignity, their patient way of being, their unshakable reliability, that's legacy. And if we don't speak about them, if we don't honor their lives, those stories risk fading into the background. So speak it aloud. Tell your children. Write it down in a letter. Share it with a friend over coffee. Make time to remember. Because even silence, when passed down with love, can become the loudest legacy of all. My grandfather didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His wisdom lives on in the way I walk through life, in how I treat others, in what I value. And maybe, just maybe, you carry someone's quiet wisdom with you too. So if this story reminded you of someone you loved, someone who taught you through silence, through steady hands and patient eyes, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. That's how legacies live on, not always in history books, not in headlines, but in quiet echoes, in how we choose to live. In memory of those who spoke softly, but changed everything.